Shalom. Welcome to Lights of the Nations. We are studying the Rambam, blueprint for the building of the temple, Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the laws of the chosen house, and we are in chapter 4. So, how fitting now that we are in the midst of the month of Kislev. Soon we'll be observing the holiday of Hanukkah, which of course commemorates the rededication of the Second Temple, and everything that we are studying about is for the purpose of building the temple, dedicating the temple, not ancient history. So this is an intensive course for all of our fellow temple builders to be as prepared as possible. And we have been examining the statutes of the sanctuary itself as far as its width and height and length, talking about Maimonides' interpretation of the Mishnah in Tractate Midot and his whole grasp of the 100 cubit square, as it were, of the building itself. And we have seen that we have a distance of 100 amot, 100 cubits, from west to east, as well as from north to south. And we have also spoken about the unique concept of each wall mentioned in that Mishnah, according to the Rambam's interpretation, really, except for the external walls, really represents, and also except for the eastern wall of the gate of the Heichal, there are sets of walls. The walls actually represent two walls with a space in between. I'm going to leave that off now for the moment and continue with Halacha Vav, although afterwards we will be talking about the significance of those cells, what we're calling the ta'im, the space in between the walls. And we find in Halacha Vav, in the 6th entry in this chapter, we find that we are now standing in the entrance hall, the ulam of the sanctuary. So please bear with me for a moment and picture, if you would, the entrance hall. And the Rambam is now going to be describing a rather unique system of entry that the Kohanim utilized in order to open the great gate of the sanctuary itself, the Heichal, every morning. So we are in the entrance hall, and let's take a look at it together and have a view of the entrance hall of the sanctuary. We see the tables that we learned about earlier in our study, upon which the showbread rests. We have the golden table and the marble table. We see also the supportive beams that stretch from the upper wall of the sanctuary to that of the entrance hall. And there are also these large golden chains, which these young priests in training would climb in order to get a glimpse of the golden crowns that were on display there at the entrance to the sanctuary. We have also the beautiful lamp that was donated by Queen Helena, and also these golden leaves and grape clusters that also represent donations from the people of Israel to the treasury of the temple, to be used upon need for the upkeep of the temple. So this is the entrance hall, and the great gates that leads into the sanctuary itself is in the center of this wall in the entrance hall. And as we're going to discuss later, the passageway into the entrance hall itself has no door. There is a curtain there, but it has no door. And then within the entrance hall, we have the great gate itself into the sanctuary. But Maimonides tells us as follows, as we begin Halacha Vav, ha-pishpash, v'hu shar hakatan. There is a concept of a small door, which sometimes in English is translated as, I believe the word that's used is wicket. A wicket, a small gateway, that ushnei pishpeshim hayu laheichal mitzidei hashar hagadol sheba'emtza. In the entrance hall, in which we are presently located, there are two smaller gates, two small entrances that are found on the side of the great gates, which is in the center. echad b'tzafon ve'echad b'darom. One to the north and one to the south. Ostensibly you can call it to the right and the left, but the fact is if you have your bearings it's very important. So the north and south of the Great Gate. Two small openings, two small entrances that themselves were actually gates with doors and locks. So again, this Mishnah too is based on a Mishnah, the second Mishnah in the 4th chapter of Tractate Midot, which tells us about these pishpeshim, these small gates, small openings at the side of the Great Gate to the sanctuary. There were also such smaller openings on the sides of the Nicanor gates, which lead from the court of the women into the court of Israel, but we're not discussing those pishpeshim now, and that's why it's important to me that you understand we are now talking about the small gates on the side of the Great Gate that leads into the sanctuary itself. Now, the Rambam tells us as follows: Echad b'tzafon ve'echad b'darom. One is to the north and one is to the south. Shebidarom lo nichnas bo adam me'olam. This smaller pishpesh, this small wicket, entrance, gate, opening, on the southern side of the Great Gate of the sanctuary, no one ever entered into it. It was constantly kept locked. V'alav hu meforash al yidei Chezkel, and the Rambam tells us it is this gate which was explained in the prophecy of Ezekiel. And the words that the text of Maimonides quotes here, part of that verse, the verse is found in Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 2. The words quoted by the Rambam are, Hashara hazeh sagur yihiyeh lo yifateach. This gate shall be kept closed, and it shall not be opened. But let's read together the entire verse, because it's really quite important. What does that verse in Ezekiel say? And again, it's chapter 44, and verse 2. Then Hashem, the Lord, said to me, this is the vision of Ezekiel, this gate shall be shut. It shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered in by it. Therefore, it shall be shut. So this is quite interesting. The verse tells us that Hashem himself has entered into the temple through that gate, and therefore no man shall enter in by this gate. Now, some people erroneously associate this concept of the closed gate that is discussed, that is prophesied, that is mentioned in this verse in Ezekiel. Some people associate that with the closed mercy gate or golden gate, which can be seen to this very day on the southern side, on the eastern side of the Temple Mount. Those visitors to the Temple Mount and those who have seen photographs know that there is an entrance into the Temple Mount that is closed, that was closed fairly recently in history, some hundreds of years ago, by Muslims. And some people think that this is what the closed gate in Ezekiel is talking about. But this is not the case at all. This concept of this closed gate has no bearing or association with any messianic tradition. So let's not confuse things. There is an idea that many people are aware of later in history that somehow the mercy gate, called in Hebrew Shar HaRachamim, the gate of mercy, otherwise referred to as the Golden Gate, has somehow become associated in some sort of later oral tradition with the arrival of the Messiah. And indeed, we do believe, as we can find a reference to in the Torah itself, we believe that the temple is supposed to be built first, and that the Messiah will come and enter into the temple. So there developed within history an idea of the Messiah coming into the temple from this gate. And this is actually a very interesting point of study to try to determine exactly when this concept developed. And if it's truly a Jewish source, or perhaps it's a Christian source. When did this tradition develop exactly, that the Mashiach, Messiah, would enter into the temple through this gate, the mercy gate, which, by the way, may well not even have been a gate in the time of the Second Temple, because that gate is not mentioned by the Mishnah itself. In any event, the notion of the Messiah arriving into the temple through this or any gate was enough to cause the Muslims anxiety to seal it up, so that to make it all the more difficult for the prophesied Mashiach to arrive. In any event, this is not what we are referring to now. Now we are referring to a gate within the structure of the temple itself, in fact, that led into the sanctuary, not on the outer perimeter of the Temple Mount. And this closed gate was a feature of the Second Temple itself. And this gives me the opportunity to reiterate something that's a very important principle and relates to one of the most popular questions that is constantly posed regarding the actual design for the construction of the temple, where people ask, is it going to be based along the lines of the first temple? Is it going to be along the lines of the second temple? And of course, most importantly, what do either of those programs have to do with the vision of Ezekiel, which any serious student of our Bible can see. Vision of Ezekiel, as we've just quoted just one verse from those chapters in the book of Ezekiel. That program for the design of the temple is quite far removed from the reality of what we know about the second temple. It's something totally different, totally on a much larger scale. And there are many depictions and interpretations and working models of the vision of Ezekiel. However, be that as it may, and with all due respect to all of the scholarship that has grown around the vision of Ezekiel, let us do justice now to our master Maimonides, since we are actually teaching now and talking about the Rambam. The Rambam's interpretation of this whole conundrum of the relationship between everything that we're learning about the Second Temple and the vision of Ezekiel, the Rambam maintains that we do not really have the total presence of mind, capacity, however you want to describe it, as intellectually or spiritually, we don't have what it takes on our level today to really understand what Ezekiel was referring to. And therefore, writes Maimonides in his introduction to Tractate Midot, writes a very important principle that is his guiding principle of understanding this conundrum. Rambam says, we, as the people of Israel, are obligated to build the temple along the lines of the Second Temple. And when the time comes, when we will have an expanded consciousness, when we will have a greater capacity to understand the elements of prophecy that are included in, after all, the prophetic vision of Ezekiel, that frankly we don't have that level spiritually to perceive. But when we do receive that, because we will receive it in the future, and all of the prophets tell us that we will have a great ingress of empowerment of a certain divine perception, and Isaiah says that the knowledge of God will be prevalent and cover the earth like the water of the seas. So the Rambam says then, at that time, the builders will interpolate, will add on to what they have built all that they had not previously been able to understand from Ezekiel's vision. But, and here is the most important point that I've been leading up to, so please understand, but the Rambam emphasizes, everything which the builders of the Second Temple had been able to understand based on Ezekiel's vision, they already incorporated into their structure. And therefore, there are a number of aspects of the Second Temple that are based on Ezekiel's vision. So if you think, that what we're saying here, or what the Rambam is instructing us, is that we have to wait until that elevated time of consciousness and Bezrat Hashem, and the time that God should give us in the Third Temple, that we'll be able to understand all of that. No, we already did have some of those features in the Second Temple, but only 3 actually. And one of them is what we are learning about right now, because after all, the prophecy of Ezekiel was stated after the destruction of the First Temple. And so this is a concept of tradition that he records, that the builders who came back to build the Second Temple, they took into consideration this particular aspect of Ezekiel's vision, and that's why this particular gate was this pishpesh, this small wicket, small opening gateway alongside the great gate of the Heichal. That's why it was kept closed, because that is the verse from Ezekiel. So let's understand a little bit about how this works. First of all, this expression, the great gates. Rambam here calls it Hashar Hagadol Shebe'emtza, the great gate that leads into the sanctuary. Also, don't make a mistake here. This gate measured no larger than the other gates. But it was called the Great Gate, one can say either because of its importance, because it was the major gate of the sanctuary, just as there are verses in the Torah that refer to the Euphrates by the expression Hanahar Hagadol, the great river, even though actually physically it wasn't bigger than the other rivers that were described, but because of its importance in delineating the boundary of the land of Israel, the Torah calls it the Great Gate. So too, one can say that this is called the Great Gate because it's so important. Or there are other interpretations that say that the reason that it's called the Great Gate is because of its sanctity. And then there are yet others that say very simply that it's called the Great Gate to delineate, to distinguish it from the smaller gates at its side, the pishpeshim, about which we are learning right now. So we are going to be seeing momentarily, hopefully, that the pishpesh on the northern side actually has a very important function. It actually facilitates entrance into the sanctuary itself in a very unique way. But this northern pishpesh, this northern smaller gate, has no functionality for everyday use because of this verse that says, Hashem spoke to me, the prophet says, and says, this gate shall remain closed, shall not be open, and no man shall pass through it, because Hashem, the God of Israel, has entered into it. So, what does that mean exactly? Again, this is not part of any sort of messianic vision. This actually refers to the status of the Second Temple. And basically, although actually there is an interpretation, I think Rashi tells us, it's referring to the future, a future entrance into the temple. However, but that is of Hashem's presence itself. However, there are other interpretations that explain, for example, on a more homiletical level, that this gate should remain closed because Hashem, the Holy One, blessed be He, doesn't need a gate to enter into the temple. And that's one thing that the closed gate actually teaches us. He doesn't need a door to be open in order to rest His presence there. And then there is also a concept that others speak about, that there's a certain kind of honor afforded the gate. The idea is that the Shekhinah has entered into the temple through that gate, and therefore it remains closed. And then there are other ideas that are expressed as well. For example, there is a midrash, the Midrash Tanchuma, that tells us that the emphasis in the verse of Hashem having entered into this through this small entrance, as opposed to entering through the great gate, is basically an expression of God's humility, which is a very beautiful lesson. In other words, instead of choosing to enter, again, this is all totally symbolic, because the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which can be everywhere, does not need any gate, large or small, to enter into. But the teaching that our sages are telling us is that God chose to enter into, as it were, to have His presence enter into the temple through the smaller gate, the modest wicket, as opposed to the grand entrance of the sanctuary, obviously to teach us humility as well. So, this concept of the gate, which is found on the northern side, again, just in case I made a mistake and explained it and didn't use the right word, the gate on the southern side is the one which no man enters into. I'll read it again. The Shnei pishpeshim hayu leheichal mitzidei hashar hagadol shebe'emtza. There are two small entrances alongside the great gate that enters into in the center that enters into the sanctuary. One on the north and one on the south. Shebedarom, the one on the south. Lo nichnas bo adam me'olam. No one ever enters into that southern wicket, because of the verse in Ezekiel. V'shebetzafon bo nichnasinu mahalech ben shnei haktalim ad shemagia lemakom patuach lakodesh mismolo. V'nichnas letoch haheichal mahalech ad shar hagadol potcho. This is a very unique concept that the Rambam tells us about here. The smaller entrance alongside the great gate of the heichal, of the sanctuary, facilitated actually the opening of the great gate itself every morning. How is this done? When the Kohanim would begin the daily service, they would not enter into the heichal through the great gate. This smaller wicket entrance on the northern side was equipped with a lock and a handle, just like any other gate, and actually an opening. We have an illustration here that can show you exactly how this was done. The Kohen would actually reach into the door, the smaller door, and open it. And then what happened was as follows. There is actually a passage in between the walls. This small door on the northern side of the sanctuary gate opens into a passage that eventually comes to an opening opposite the gate itself. So in the morning, the prescription of beginning the service was that one of the Kohanim would go in through, after opening the lock of the pishpesh, would go in and follow this route to the gate of the sanctuary itself, and then unlock the gates and open it. But in other words, this was done from the inside of the sanctuary itself. And this is what the Rambam is referring to, that this is again based on the Mishnah itself in Tractate Midot, and the language there is that the Kohen would take the key and open up the pishpesh, just as we've seen in our illustration, and enter into the cell, which is actually the space in between the wall, and from there would proceed to a spot opposite the gate, the great gate itself, and from there, from the inside of the heichal, would open the door of the sanctuary itself. In other words, between that space and the sanctuary, there was no door. He would find himself having traversed that passageway opposite the entrance, and there he would open the door itself. And this is a very remarkable procedure, and we have a parallel rendering of how it was done in another tractate, in Tractate Tamid, where there it says that the Kohen would take the key and open up the pishpesh, go into the cell, and from the cell, that is the space, to the sanctuary, until, as it would be, he would be walking parallel, and then when he would come to the great gate itself, he would release the bolt. This is the language of the description in Tractate Tamid, and then he would open the gate from within. And how this worked exactly also is something that we have to learn about. There were actually two sets of doors. In other words, the gate of the heichal, the great gate itself of the heichal, we're going to see, is actually comprised of two separate sets of doors. And continues the language of Tractate Tamid, says the Kohen who was appointed to slaughter the morning Tamid, the morning offering, would not go about his work until he heard the sound of the great gate opening. And this was done every single morning before the preparation of the Tamid offering, the daily communal offering. First thing was that the heichal itself, the sanctuary, whose gate is locked during the night because there is no actual service in the temple at night, with the exception of the fact that the menorah is burning and what is left on the altar is also burning into the night. Otherwise, the gate of the temple is kept locked and is opened first thing in the morning from within. And this is essentially what Maimonides is giving over to us in Halacha Vav. We'll just begin now Halacha Zayin for now. And the Rambam tells us in Halacha Zayin, in number 7, Hashar Hagadol Haya Rachbo Esr Amot Vigavho Esrim Amma. The great gate of the sanctuary was 10 amot wide and 20 amot high. And as I mentioned, Ve'arba Delatot Hayulo, but it actually consisted of 4 doors. Shtayim Bifnim, Ushtayim Bachutz. There were 2 doors on the inner side and 2 doors on the outer side. Hachitzonot niftachot letoch hapetach lechasot avyo shel kotel. The outer doors opened into the entrance, as it were, and covered over the thickness of the walls. V'hapnimiyot niftachot letoch habayit. And the inner gates opened into the sanctuary itself, lechasot acharei hadlatot, and covered over the space behind the doors. What is the meaning of this? This actually has great significance. We're going to pick up here and study a little bit about the details of how this concept of the double doors worked, opening up the Heichal, the sanctuary, every morning, there to begin the daily service and cause the light of the divine presence to dwell amongst all humanity, the light to Israel and the light to the nations.
Light to the Nations is produced by the Temple Institute, Jerusalem, Israel. Dedications are available for upcoming Light to the Nations teachings. To make a dedication, please visit templeinstitute.org, the multimedia section, Light to the Nations, or email us at temple@temple.org.il. Your dedications help to make these productions possible.